Hey everyone, welcome back to Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, and I am bringing you a surprise today, something I have been working on for a little while. I didn't want to announce it, but now it's time to drop the first episode of what I'm going to be doing here. Now, many of you enjoyed when I brought you the daily updates throughout the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Got a lot of downloads on that. Everybody seemed to really enjoy the content I was bringing them. And so the case that I will be covering now seems very fitting, especially since many people think they are tied in together. And that is, of course, right now on trial is Duane Keffe D Davis for orchestrating the murder of Tupac Shakur. Now, I'm going to jump right into this one, and the first thing I'm going to do for those of you that may not be super familiar, I'm sure everyone is somewhat familiar with Tupac. He was one of the most influential and controversial figures in hip-hop history. Now, his career was cut short, but it was extremely impactful. It spanned music, he did movies, and it had a cultural influence that was just off the chart. And he did this all by the age of 25 when he was murdered in 1996 in Las Vegas. A little history on Tupac. He was born on June 16th, 1971. His actual birth name is Lassany Parrish Crooks. He was born in New York. He was later renamed Tupac Shakur. He was raised by his mother, Afeni, who is a former Black Panther. He spent parts of his childhood in New York and Baltimore, where he actually attended a very prestigious school called the Baltimore School for the Arts. Later, he lived in Oakland, California. Now, he began his music career in the early 1990s as a roadie and a dancer, as well as a backup performer for the Oakland-based group Digital Underground, which, if you're in my age group, you sure know who Digital Underground was. He appeared on their 1991 hit Same Song and in the film Nothing But Trouble. Now, his music career transitioned pretty quickly into a solo career. He became known for raw, politically charged, deeply personal lyrics. Man, this guy was like a poet, and he would talk about street life, social injustices in his mind, and aggression. He had some pretty key albums. Tupacalypse Now he released in 1991. That was his debut album. One song that sticks out to me is Brenda's Got a Baby. Very, very controversial and also a very popular song. In 1993, he released an album called Strictly for My, Niggaz, and that got even more album success. I Get Around with Digital Underground was one of the songs on that album, as well as Keep Your Head Up. In 1995, he released Me Against the World. In 1996, he really got big when he had probably the biggest double album in hip-hop history with All Eyes on Me. That was certified diamond, and of course had massive hits like California Love with Dr. Dre, How Do You Want It, and two of America's Most Wanted with Snoop Dogg. He released an album after that in 1996, post-death, under the name Machiavelli as well, which was a very popular album. Now, acting, no lack of talent there either. He released the movie Juice in 1992, and it was really a breakout album for Tupac. He played the role of Bishop. In 1993, Poetic Justice came out. Loved that movie. He played opposite of Janet Jackson in that movie. Above the Rim in 1994. And he did some other movies that were released after his death as well, but those are the most notable. Now, his career was marked by some pretty heavy legal troubles. He had a high-profile sexual assault case that led to a prison sentence, and he was released on appeal. He was also shot 5 times in a 1994 robbery in New York. Guess where at? At the lower offices of Sean Diddy Combs' office in New York, and a lot of people always tied that into Sean Combs having something to do with that. And then in September of 1996, he was shot in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. He was riding with Suge Knight, who was his producer, and he died 6 days later on September 13th of 1996. And that is what led us into this trial today. Now, some interesting details before we get into the trial. First of all, I wanted to look at his net worth at the time of his death and now, because I think it's going to play somewhat of a role in this case. So at the time of his death in 1996, look, this is his peak, right? His net worth was only about $200,000. He had roughly $105,000 in a checking account. He owned 2 cars. He had a modest 5-figure life insurance policy, which went to his half sister. He didn't own any real estate, though. He lived in homes, including a Woodland Hills mansion. None of those were in his name. He had no significant stocks, investments, or retirement accounts, despite selling tens of millions of dollars worth of albums just in 1996. $60 million, in fact, in album sales just that year. He was deeply in debt. Reports indicated he owed Death Row Records about $5 million due to large advances the label had given him for recording costs, videos, cars, housing, jewelry, security, and all these other expenses. Now, that's not uncommon in the music industry. They do advances quite often, but they have to be repaid or recouped before you can get any meaningful royalties off of your album. And because Tupac died without a will, his mother, Afeni, inherited and controlled the estate. She later fought legal battles with Death Row Records over royalties and unreleased music, which eventually helped the estate grow in value. Actually, she did a great job of managing that and growing that estate. The current estimated value as of today, so 30 years after his death, right, the value today is worth between 40 million and 100 million. It was 200,000 in his peak when he was alive. That is insane to me, the difference there. Now, another guy you're going to hear a lot about in this trial is Suge Knight, the guy I mentioned that was his producer. Tupac and Suge had a close but a very complicated relationship, and ultimately a tragic relationship. And how they got together: in 1995, Tupac was in prison on a sexual assault conviction. He was facing a multi-million-dollar bail that he could not pay. The powerful and intimidating co-founder of Death Row Records, Suge Knight, he paid Tupac's bail. It was reportedly around $3 million, depending on the source you talk to. Some say it was half that. But what he did was he got Tupac to sign a multi-album deal with the label, and this deal rescued Tupac from jail, got him out, and made him the biggest star on Death Row's label. Now, once free, Tupac really embraced Death Row's aggressive West Coast gangster rap image. And these two in particular, Suge and Tupac, became extremely close. They would describe themselves as brothers, like twins, like father and son, all these sort of things. And Tupac recorded his biggest commercial album, that All Eyes on Me album, in 1996 under Death Row Records. You would see Suge and Tupac together everywhere. Now, there was a dark side to that. Many people close to Tupac would later say the relationship, they would describe it as a deal with the devil. Death Row was deeply entangled with street gangs, particularly Bloods. We'll talk a little bit about that. Critics would argue that Suge's world pulled Tupac deeper into dangerous street politics and an escalating feud with Bad Boy Records and the Notorious B.I.G., who were produced by Sean Diddy Combs. So that's just a little overview of the history, a quick overview of the history of what led us to court and to hopefully getting to the bottom of who killed Tupac Shakur. So August 17th, 2026, yesterday from when I'm recording this, court opens. Jury is chosen. So the opening statements start, and it starts with the prosecutor. Incidentally, this all occurred, what you're going to hear about, in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1996. And the chief deputy district attorney, Binu, Palal, he frames the case as a clear act of gang revenge. So he tells the jury that Davis, the leader, or what you would call the shot caller, of the South Side Compton Crips, did not personally pull the trigger. Instead, he planned the retaliation. He obtained the gun. He got in the white Cadillac that carried out the drive-by shooting of Tupac. And he claimed that Keffe D made sure the shooters were armed and ready. The motive was revenge for a public beating of Davis's nephew, Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, by Tupac and members of Death Row / Mob Piru entourage earlier that evening. So I'm going to give you the sequence of the events as he presented them. He said, on the night of September 7th, 1996, after a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand, Tupac and associates assaulted Anderson in the hotel lobby casino area. The beating was captured on security video, which I'm sure all of you have seen that. And the prosecutor said it was a humiliating public attack. And you can see in that video Tupac stomping Orlando in that casino lobby. Now, Davis learned of this, Keffe D, and according to prosecutors, he spent the next roughly 2.5 hours planning a response. In his world, and according to gang culture, there was no question that a response was required. Davis acquired a .40 caliber Glock, and he and 3 others, a driver by the name of Terrence T. Brown, DeAndre Big Dre Smith, and his nephew, Orlando Anderson, got in a white Cadillac. So you got the guy that is basically the leader of this gang in Keffe D, and his nephew, Orlando Anderson, just got a beat down. So they jump into this white Cadillac, and while driving and after deciding to get alcohol and return to the Strip, they spot Tupac in Suge Knight's convoy, which is a black BMW with a bunch of cars behind them. They make a U-turn and they pull alongside. Now, important to mention, this is after a Mike Tyson fight. You know how packed it can be on the Las Vegas Strip on a normal basis. This is after a Mike Tyson fight when Tyson was in his prime. So you can imagine how packed that Strip was. So Davis sits in the front passenger seat, but because the Cadillac pulled up on the BMW's passenger side, he didn't have a clear shot. He would have had to reach across the driver to shoot. So according to prosecutors, he handed or tossed the gun to the back seat to Smith or Anderson. Prosecutors said Smith kind of hesitated. He didn't want to shoot. And Anderson says, "Give me that gun." He takes the gun from him and he starts shooting at Tupac and shoots him several times. Now, the prosecutor highlighted Davis's own recorded words from statements. And he said, quote, "If he would have been on my side, I would have blasted, and I gave it to Dre." So a major theme was that the jury would not have to take the state's word for it. They can hear from Davis himself. And prosecutors would point to a 2008 secret proffer interview made with a federal task force that was originally investigating the murder of notorious B.I.G. They were put together to investigate that, and that led them to this investigation into the murder of Tupac Shakur. A 2009 interview with Las Vegas police was also mentioned, as well as other statements over the years. And Keffe D couldn't keep his mouth shut, man. He went on media interviews. He even wrote a book. He went on a BET appearance in 2017 and kind of ran his mouth. And as I said, that book, Compton Street Legend, was a 2019 memoir in which he described aspects of that night, including tossing that gun into the back seat. So the prosecutor, he closed this opening argument by stressing accountability even after 30 years of this death. He said, "Let me be clear, Duane Davis did not pull the trigger, but what he did do was plan the retaliation for the beating of his nephew. You will learn that Duane Davis got the gun. You will learn that he got into the white Cadillac. You will learn that when the opportunity presented itself for retribution, Duane Davis made sure the shooters were armed and ready to execute their revenge. And remarkably, you will learn from Duane Davis himself. Now, nearly 30 years later, we're going to ask you to finally hold Duane Davis accountable." Now, that statement set up the prosecution's case as relying primarily on Davis's own admissions, and it's hard to beat that kind of reliability. The MGM security video of the earlier fight and the sequence of the gang rivalry and retaliation rather than traditional forensic or eyewitness identification evidence from that shooting. They got the guy in his own words saying he did this. So he kind of ended his opening statement there. The defense then gets up, and the defense attorney is Michael Sanft. And I got to say, if you're a Saturday Night Live fan and you've ever watched Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, this dude looks just like that dude. I can't, every time he gets up to talk, that is Mr. Key Rock from Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. So you got to check that out and tell me I can't be the only one that thinks that. But anyway, he gets up, he delivers his opening statement for the defense of Duane Keffe D. Davis. And I guess you could say his central theme was fact versus fiction. He reportedly told the jury that the prosecution's case is built almost entirely on uncorroborated statements and, mostly from Keffe D himself rather than independent verifiable facts. And I found that kind of strange because, you couldn't beat a statement more than I did it, someone saying they did it or had something to do with it. But his core arguments consisted of the facts linking Davis to the crime. He said there are no facts that point to Keffe, not one. And he argued that prosecutors are presenting Davis's old interviews in his 2019 book as if they are proof, when in reality they are unproven claims that must be independently corroborated. Simply repeating the story doesn't make it true, he said. He also said Davis is an unreliable narrator, basically said he's full of crap. Sanft directly attacked his own client's credibility. He told the jury that Davis is known for fabricating stories and showed a PowerPoint slide with the word bullshit. No kidding. He also pointed out that after Davis made detailed admissions to a federal task force in 2008 and later to Las Vegas police in 2009 and in media interviews, no charges were filed for years. And he said it was because they knew he was full of shit. Otherwise, they would have charged him. Why would they not have charged him? He suggested that investigators looked into the claims, could not verify them, and therefore never moved forward until much later. He also said the 30-year investigation was deeply flawed. He walked the jury through the investigation timeline. He highlighted problems with detectives. He brought up one named Becker, and he said that Becker kept the case file locked in his office because of media leaks. He said that Becker distrusted the Compton Police Department, which was later shut down for corruption. And he said many reports are now missing. He also brought up Detective Long, who handled the case for roughly 15 years. And he said that this detective was given a gun by the LAPD for testing that turned out not to be the murder weapon. He said Detective Long interviewed Davis in 2009 while aware of an earlier federal interview, yet no charges came out of that. He said later investigators would focus more on closing the case than thoroughly solving it. And he said a search warrant executed on Davis's home produced nothing of value. The documentation was incomplete and it was created after the fact. And he argued that the long time since this occurred, 30 years, resulted in lost records, and a lot of people are dead that were involved in the case, and it just would be impossible that anyone could corroborate this story of Keffe's involvement. And that because Keffe Davis is pretty much a liar, you can't believe him, is what he's saying. He also said there's no evidence that places Davis in Las Vegas at the time of the incident. He said there's no hotel or flight tickets in Keffe D's name, no credit card receipts, no photos, and no other physical or documentary proof that he was even in Las Vegas on September 7th of 1996. He then asked the jury a pointed question. He said, what facts do they have to even put Keffe D in the car in Las Vegas on September 7th of 1996? He said there was credibility problems also with the expected state witnesses. He said many of these witnesses have criminal records, they paid informants, motives to lie, or past misconduct by detectives, such as, and he brought up Greg Kading, who will play a big part in this case, who he accused of stealing case files and manipulating investigations. And in closing of his opening argument, he told the jury the state cannot meet its burden of proving first-degree murder or even assisting in it beyond a reasonable doubt. He urged the jury to demand actual corroborating facts rather than accepting decade-old, self-serving, uncorroborated statements of truth. And then he kind of rested his opening statement. And it was time to get into trial, and that's what they did. And the first witness up was a guy by the name of Gary Dale. He is a retired Las Vegas Metro Police Department officer, and he was a bicycle officer. So he was on bicycle patrol, and he was assigned to the Las Vegas Strip on the night of September 7th of 1996. According to his testimony, approximately 10 minutes before the shooting, he and his partner conducted a traffic stop on a black BMW driven by Marion Suge Knight, with Tupac Shakur in the passenger seat. And they asked Tupac and Suge Knight, why do you not have a license plate on the back of this car? And the two claimed they removed it for a music video. And he said the interaction was cordial. He even mentioned commenting on Shakur's large gold chain medallion, which when he's saying this in court, I'm like, that was probably a little uncomfortable for Tupac when you got an officer saying, hey, you got that's a big chunk of gold you got around your neck. I mean, that was kind of a weird thing to say to somebody. But anyway, that's what he said. And then he said they told them, you got to put your license plate back on and we'll release you and let you go about your business. But they didn't even write a report about the stop, which I found kind of strange. Normally you would at least log that you stopped, especially when it was Tupac Shakur. But regardless of that, roughly 10 minutes later, Dale responded to a radio call about a shooting, and he located, hey, look at there, the same BMW I just stopped on my bicycle. It was stopped on the median near Harmon Boulevard and Las Vegas Boulevard. Knight was outside the vehicle. He was bleeding from a head wound, and this officer described it as appearing to be a chunk of shrapnel in his head. And the whole time that Suge Knight is shot, he's repeatedly directing officers to attend to Shakur instead of himself, according to this officer. Emergency medical personnel were removing a badly wounded Shakur from the car at that time. And Dale, the officer, accompanied Shakur in the ambulance to University Medical Center. Shakur was conscious and talking at that point, and Dale said he repeatedly asked him to identify the assailants. Shakur refused, responding to the effect of no, and we'll take care of it, or similar wording multiple times. Dale could not get any further information from him. He said at the hospital, he impounded Shakur's personal belongings and noted the large gold necklace he had been wearing during that earlier traffic stop was no longer on him. And that's common. If somebody's going to the hospital or jail or something like that, their boys will take that necklace off. But he did note that that was no longer on him. On cross-examination, Dale confirmed that strip traffic was congested that night, as was typical, and I'm sure over-congested because of that fight. And the next witness up was Ingrid Stokes, a female who was visiting Las Vegas from LA, and she came in specifically that weekend to attend the Mike Tyson fight with 3 female friends at the MGM Grand, but they ended up missing the fight somehow. They stayed at the Luxor, and they later went to the MGM area after the fight to socialize, and hey, we're going to party. We're here. The fight's over, so we're going to see where it's all going down, right? They were in a rented convertible Chrysler Sebring, and Shaylin was driving, one of her friends. Stoke was in the front passenger seat. Tanisha and Lauren, their other 2 friends, were behind the driver and passenger. Roughly 15 minutes after leaving the MGM Grand Arena, they encountered the BMW driven by Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur. And of course, Suge Knight driving, Tupac in the passenger seat, front passenger seat. Lauren actually knew Suge Knight and had them pull alongside so she could speak with him. Suge says, hey, follow us. We're going to what's known as Club 662. They said, hell yeah, that's where the party is. They agreed, and they fell in behind that BMW on the strip. Now, another vehicle, they said, was behind them and kept trying to pass them or cut off in front of them. And later, she said she understood it was likely part of the entourage. Stokes, who was driving at this point, decided they should take their own route to the club. It's kind of making her nervous. This car was weaving in and out, trying to get in front of them. There was a lot of traffic. She's like, I know another way to get there. So she just turns off on another road and tries to get to 662 kind of a back way. She said the last time she saw Tupac, he was sitting relaxed in the passenger seat listening to music. He wasn't hanging out the window at this point or interacting with fans, just kind of sitting there. And she said they came up to a light, and Stokes and Shailene were leaning out, unbuckling seatbelts to switch seats, when all of a sudden they hear a variety of gunshots fire out. She freaked out, she said, screamed. She grabbed Shailene's head to pull her down for cover. And she said she put the car in drive and got the hell out of there. And they fled down a street called Koval and nearly collided with a light-colored four-door vehicle that was in or near the turning lane. Stokes said she didn't see who was inside that white car, but they were driving as if they were leaving something, fleeing a scene, if you will. She said they later returned to the area and police made them sit on the sidewalk, and she said they were kind of assholes. She didn't say that word, but she said, we felt like we were being treated like suspects, which made Stokes very uneasy. She said, look, full disclosure, I'm not a fan of the police at that time. She feared being identified as a witness by onlookers. And when the attorney asked her about that, she said, snitches get stitches. So I didn't want to be seen as someone who may be identifying somebody and end up in the same situation as Tupac. She said she did not see the shooters or key details of the attack itself and had no direct knowledge beyond the sequence of events around the car and the sound of the gunfire. Now, witness number 3 this day then took the stand after she was released, and this was a detective. His name was Brent Becker. He's the third witness on day 1, and he was called to the scene around 12:30 or 1 o'clock a.m. on September 8th of 1996. So this is roughly 2 hours after this shooting. He said it was unusual for homicide detectives to respond while the victim was still alive, because that's what he was. He's now retired, but he was a homicide detective. You've got Tupac who's still alive at this time, and you're getting called to a scene. That is kind of unusual. But he chalked this up to the fact of who it was, because it was very high profile. He said by the time he arrived, most people had left. He used the term skedaddled. And he said witnesses in a trailing vehicle included bodyguard Frank Alexander and some members of another rap group called Outlaws that rapped with Tupac Shakur. He described a white Cadillac with 2 to 4 male occupants pulling up on the right passenger side of Suge Knight's black BMW, opening fire. And Frank Alexander told him that vehicle then turned south on Koval. Bullet strikes were only on the passenger side of the BMW, he said. He did talk about shell casings being recovered, but he said they didn't match the full number of impact marks, which he also said was not unusual, because those can get stuck in the tread of tires and they can end up in, Idaho somewhere when they come out of there. It's just not unusual for that to happen. He said that .40 caliber Glock was what was determined to be used as far as a gun. And he said the way they know that is the way the striations are made in Glocks. You know right away what type of weapons they are from the shell casing. He said no witnesses could identify the shooter beyond a general description of a black man. Photo lineups of potential suspects, including Crip members, produced no identification. And he said investigators later learned of the earlier fight at the MGM Grand involving Shakur, Knight, and others, where they beat down Orlando Anderson. He said nobody said anything about this when we were interviewing them on the scene. He said their next steps were they wanted to interview Suge Knight, but initially that was unsuccessful. He said when Knight finally came in, which was about 3 days later, he arrived with 3 attorneys, and Becker described the interview as very practiced. And he said the reason he suspected that was Knight was surprisingly timid. And he said all these interviews I've seen him in, He's kind of this badass guy who is very intimidating, and he was like a child in these interviews, very timid, and he said it just did not seem like it was really the guy. Knight claimed he knew nothing and recognized no one, and Becker testified that he believed Knight lied. He also went on to say the investigation faced significant obstacles. They had difficulty getting witnesses to talk. They were concerned about leaks. He went on to say he locked case files in his desk, and some of those materials still disappeared. And he said a leaked Polaroid of Shakur on the autopsy table got out. He said early suspects that investigators focused on included Duane Keffe D. Davis, Orlando Anderson, Big Dre, DeAndre Smith, and Terrence Brown. Becker said he made multiple trips to California, but often got the runaround, including from Death Row Records. He noted distrust of some Compton PD interview techniques. Just didn't like the way they were doing their policing. And so that was his testimony. Now, the fourth witness was a former LAPD detective by the name of Fred Miller. Now, here's something interesting. He didn't investigate initially the Tupac case. He was actually an investigator on the notorious Big murder, and he was able, in his mind, to connect these two cases. And just brief points from his testimony, he spent over 30 years with LAPD, worked robbery, homicide, and special investigations. And his unit took over the Biggie investigation roughly 60 days after that shooting on March 9th of 1997. And that was due to manpower issues that they were having of some sort, he said. Now, just a quick catch up here. Biggie was shot 4 times while leaving a music industry party at the Peterson Automotive Museum. This is in Los Angeles. And investigators were looking for a newer, dark-colored Chevrolet Impala with distinctive rims in connection with that shooting. Davis, Keffe D, emerged as a potential suspect or person of interest, and Miller testified Davis was present at the Peterson Auto Museum party that night. Investigators then received information from multiple sources about a possible financial dispute or money allegedly owed to Keffe D from Sean Diddy Combs, and this became one of the leads they pursued. There were no facts behind this, just innuendo at this time, right? On cross-examination, when asked if there was actual evidence Davis was owed money by Combs, the testimony indicated it was based off of tips and information rather than confirmed proof. So it's very important to say that. He also talked about a Polaroid photograph of Keffe D that was recovered from the trunk of a Chevrolet Impala in Compton during a search related to the Biggie Smalls investigation. That photo was collected as evidence but did not ultimately help solve the Biggie case. And he also talked about portions of a recorded interview involving Miller, Davis, and Davis's then attorney, and those were played in court. And in it, Davis indicated investigators were barking up the wrong tree regarding the Biggie case and made comments that led officers to ask about Suge Knight and others. So he was trying to shift the focus away from himself and on to Suge Knight for the murder of Biggie Smalls. So the judge instructed the jury that police do not believe Davis was involved in Biggie's killing, because at this point it was kind of looking like that was what was being thrown their way. And the testimony really served to introduce the background on how Davis first came onto law enforcement's radar in the late 1990s through the Biggie investigation and related hip-hop circles, rather than directly proving the Tupac murder. So that was very important to mention as well. And there it was. That was day one. They actually got through 4 witnesses. They also got through opening statements on both sides. So they're moving pretty fast. There's supposedly, I think, between 35 and 40 witnesses in this case. It's expected to last a month or so, this entire case. I'm going to bring you daily updates like this as soon as they come out. Still bringing you other drops as well. This is just a little lanyap, as we call it here in South Louisiana. But we'll do this case together, and you'll see it through my eyes as these facts drop. So what's coming your way tomorrow? Well, the continued testimony of Fred Miller, the retired LAPD homicide detective. They should wrap that up. Also, Dr. Lisa Gavin is slated to take the stand. That is a forensic pathologist in Clark County and medical examiner who testified as an expert witness to detail Tupac Shakur's fatal bullet wounds and autopsy records. That's going to be some very interesting testimony. Also, Michael Ingram, who was an investigator for MGM Grand Resorts. That was where the fight had taken place between Tupac and his crew against Orlando Anderson. Should make for some interesting testimony. Kenneth Rios, a retired Las Vegas Police Department Metro detective, should also have time to testify tomorrow, as will William Heidmeyer, who is a security officer at, or was at this time, he's retired now, at Maxim Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. And they may get to some more because they are moving really quick. I don't think this is going to be anywhere near a month. If they keep moving at this pace, I think this is going to be a 2.5 to 3 week trial. Now, I bring that up because one thing I've found interesting already, and this may change as we go along, but the defense, man, I don't know what's up with that dude, but he doesn't object to anything. And I have seen, look, I've watched a lot of trials, y'all. I have seen so many opportunities where the witnesses are being led by the prosecutor. So much so, in fact, that he is finishing their sentences in a lot of cases. You can't do that. That's called leading the witness. And he's done it like 20 times so far in this trial, and the defense has not objected once. Now, you don't want to object every time someone opens their mouth on the witness stand because that frustrates the jury, and it looks like, in some ways, it could look like you're trying to hide something. But on the other aspect of that, when you've got an attorney who is completing the sentences of the people that are on the stand, he's essentially testifying rather than the witness that's on the stand. And this guy has done this 20 times at least. The defense, not a peep out of that guy. I don't know what's up with that. Maybe it'll change, but it's also one of the reasons this is moving so quickly, because he just doesn't have a problem with anything they're asking, it seems like, so far. I'm not saying that I'm on any side except the side of the truth, but I have noticed that, and it is moving fast. They're likely going to get to over 6-7 witnesses tomorrow if it continues at this pace. I will bring that episode to you tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Patreon, commercial-free early releases, bonus episodes, and more. Patreon.com/exposedpodcastfiles. Could not do this without the support of those people. Also, check out Crime Wire Weekly. That is a podcast myself and Kelly Jennings do, where we highlight the current news from all over the country that is crime related and trending, and we give our own interesting commentary on all those stories. You can check that out as well. Just search Crime Wire Weekly wherever you listen to your podcast. And lastly, 30% off at Cozy Earth just by being a listener of Exposed. Best bamboo bedding, bamboo sheets, bamboo pajamas, bamboo towels, whatever you want. 100% bamboo fabric, cooling fabric, CozyEarth.com. Use Exposed at checkout and get 30% off just for being a listener of this show. And until next time, for Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.